Hey, welcome back to Manufacturing Talks. I'm Jim Vinosky, your host. Another great show today. And this one is very close to me personally and politically. I've got Governor Greg Gianforte from Montana. I first got interested in them after I did an article about Hyundai's New Horizons studio back a few years ago. And then about a year after I did that article, found out they were establishing their R&D center in Bozeman, Montana. So I actually went out to check it out. And while I was there, learned about all these great small government free market initiatives that Governor Gianforte and the legislature in Montana were going after. And then I watched it over the couple of years since. Was back out there a year ago, saw some of the updates, did a story on one of the manufacturers who chose to go out there, and it's just such wonderful stuff. So I've got the governor with me. We're going to be chatting here on Manufacturing Talks in just a minute. Stay tuned.
Welcome to Manufacturing Talks with Jim Vinosky. Industry has a million cool stories, and Jim talks to the movers and shakers who are making them happen. Let's dive in.
PYS Media, your digital media relations agency. Public relations, website design, digital marketing. You get found by the customers and talent who need your solutions. You get media placements in top publications, the best job candidates coming to your website, a digital presence that gets you found by the right people. Call 616-298-8798 to get started today.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Manufacturing Talks. I'm Jim Vinosky, and I'm very honored today to be joined by Governor Greg Gianforte from Montana. Welcome, Governor.
Yeah, Jim, good to be with you. Thanks for having me on.
Well, it's wonderful to have you on. I've been very interested in what you guys have going on in your state for a while. We're going to dive into that. But before we do, why don't you just introduce yourself to the folks who aren't familiar with you?
Sure. Thanks, Jim. Happy to. Well, I'm an electrical engineer by training, entrepreneur by practice. My wife and I started 5 technology businesses and then found myself in a spot where we were seeing the American dream slipping away. And so made the decision to go into public service. My business experience has been in starting and growing technology businesses. The last one we started in our home with just $5,000. That business grew to one of Montana's largest commercial employers. We had about 1,100 staff members, 17 offices around the world. We were publicly traded for 8 years. I had the great privilege of serving Montana as our sole member of the U.S. House for 3.5 years. But then I really wanted to come home. And the people of Montana elected me as their 25th governor in 2020. So I've been in office just about 3 years.
Wonderful stuff. You know, it's actually one of the things that first caught my attention when I was looking into your background was that you're an engineer and you've done stuff in the real world, which I think, you know, in a lot of our public servants, we don't have that tie to what it takes to run a business.
Well, and the experiences apply directly to government. I remember my second day in office, my team had been so focused on the inauguration the day before. I came in, I had nothing on my calendar. So I did what I would have done in the private sector. I said, I just picked up 14,000 employees. Let me go meet some of them. So I literally walked across the street to the Department of Labor and Industry building and just started going desk to desk saying, hey, I'm Greg. I just started across the street. What's your name? How long you been there? And I met a guy that second day in office. He told me he had worked in that building 100 yards from the state capitol for 29 years. And he said, Mr. Governor, I've never seen a governor in this building in 29 years. You're the first one. So
wow.
Just
wonderful.
This management or walking around, getting to know people, letting them know the work they're doing is important. We have great state workers. It's like we put a football team on the field, but never told them where the end zone was.
Yeah, right. Well, and clearly you've been after defining that end zone for everybody. And I know you've been working on the general business environment there in Montana, but you know, I'm a lifelong manufacturer myself. And so I know based on what originally caught my interest when Hyundai's New Horizons Studios chose Bozeman to go out there, and I started seeing how all these manufacturers are increasingly interested in Montana, and that's something you've targeted. So why manufacturing?
Well, if I look at the primary reasons why I ran for office, number one, we need more good paying jobs, and manufacturing does that.
Yep.
If I'm out visiting with folks, if I have 100 people in an audience and I ask them, how many of you have kids or grandkids that don't live in the state of Montana anymore, almost 100% of the hands will go up. We export beef, we export grain, and we export our kids. And to preserve Montana, we need to keep our kids and grandkids here. Manufacturing does that. So we've really targeted advanced manufacturing, whether it's in photonics, advanced vehicle research, software development, like Vocom, the work they're doing in the semiconductor industry, firearms, ammunition. It's all good because it creates jobs. And we have, in conjunction with these better jobs, we have a quality of life that's just unsurpassed here in Montana. The combination is an incredible competitive advantage for manufacturers that want to avail themselves of it.
Yeah, for sure. And, based on the numbers I've received, it's clearly working, up 14% in the number of manufacturing companies in the state just in the past year. You mentioned landing the Vocom headquarters and new plant here in the U.S. I just heard recently about Brixtel and Glendive adding a plant there. So what is it that's working so well to pull manufacturers in?
Well, it's really two things. One is the quality of life for the workers. I know working with Jens at Vocom, they're a German manufacturer. They're in a small community in Germany where they're the largest employer. They wanted a similar scenario for their North American headquarters. That's why they're going to invest $90 million and create 500 jobs in Lewistown, Montana. That was the appeal to be an important player. Brixtel, they're going to bring $125 million and 350 jobs to a community of less than 5,000. Clearly, that's going to become a company town. And doing something that's important from a national defense perspective, they're going to be making about 1 billion primers a year for ammunition, as well as loading ammunition. Hyundai, I think it was the advanced research that's going on at Montana State University, and maybe it was the elk steak that I served John Suh in my home. We'll pull out all the stops to land these businesses. Or DeVel, which is a home manufacturing company. They're going to create 450 jobs in Butte, and that's going to help us with our housing. So we have a great story to tell in Montana, but I'd say the competitive weapon we have is the Montana work ethic that just doesn't quit. I saw it in my business. It allowed us to compete globally, and these companies see it too when they come here. Some people say, I've gotten a little pushback. They say, well, what are you offering these companies? What tax incentives? And let me be very clear. If you want a handout, go to Massachusetts or California someplace. What we're offering these companies, which is very compelling, is a quality of life for their employees, safe and secure communities where their rights are protected, and for the employer, it's a work ethic that won't quit. When you do tax handouts and giveaways, you got to take it from somebody to give it to somebody else. We're all about lowering the tax burden on all manufacturers and all businesses in Montana, not picking favorites here and there. And if that's appealing, then we tend to win those at-bats.
Yeah, I'm definitely glad you mentioned that, because that's another piece that appeals to me in the story of Montana, is you're not doling out these extreme subsidies that, like you said, have to come from someone else's pocket.
Yeah, which little old lady you want me to take it from?
Right. Yep. So let's focus on some of the things you have done. I know your administration and the legislature have done a lot of work on tax reduction. So what have you accomplished there?
Yeah. So we, in this last session, 2023, well, in 2021, we passed a very conservative budget, which funded all essential services, but it didn't grow the size of the government. So we have the great blessing that our legislature only meets for 90 days every 2 years. That means we have less government here, which is a good thing.
Yes.
But we came into 2023 with a $2.5 billion surplus on a $5 billion budget. And here's what we did. We gave $1 billion back to the people of Montana. It's the largest tax reduction in the history of the state. That came in the form of permanent rate reductions and rebates. An average family in Montana that owns a home got almost $4,000 back from the state because we charged them too much. So the first thing we did was we lowered the taxes on personal income tax. When I came into office, the rate was 6.9%. It's now 5.9%, and that's the rate that most people pay. We also simplified the tax code. We had 7 tax brackets. We went to 2, so that's easier to do your taxes. We exempted $1 million of business equipment for every small business in the state. That was important. We also passed what I call the entrepreneur magnet. If you start a business in Montana and it's your legit headquarters and you grow it here over a period of time, there is no tax, 0 tax on the sale of corporate stock. And the reason we did that, we want jobs are created by businesses. Businesses are created by entrepreneurs. We want more entrepreneurs. We want Montana to be a haven for entrepreneurs. We want the entrepreneurial golden geese to fly in and lay golden W-2 eggs because our goal is jobs. So we've changed our tax code. And after we gave the tax breaks and lowered it, gave people back their money, we fixed what was broken. We redid our state prison. We invested a historic $300 million in behavioral health because we want to have safe and healthy communities. We stuffed a bunch of money under the mattress for a rainy day. We still had money left over. So we paid off all the state debt. Montana is now completely debt free.
Wonderful. I know on another topic that you have focused quite a bit on regulations and reducing the burden of regulation. So can you talk about some of the things that you've worked on there?
Sure. And this was my first executive order, second day in office. I established our red tape relief task force. And this has been headed up by our lieutenant governor, who is a great partner in all this work. She spent 40 years in private practice, helping small business owners and farmers deal with regulations. So she was the perfect one to head up this effort. We went through every line of every regulation in every agency. And this last session, we introduced 188 red tape relief bills. And Pete, and I signed, the legislature was a good partner in this. They sent almost all of them to my desk, and we've now peeled those burdensome regulations off the books. Now we need regulations for public safety and to protect the environment, but we had layers of layers, as most state dues and as much as most states do, that just create friction for small business. So we're lightening the regulatory burden on businesses here, and it's making a difference.
So I'm curious, because I know one thing that so many people who attempt that run into is you've got very concentrated groups that focus on specific regulations and will fight tooth and nail to keep things in place. How did you overcome that kind of resistance?
Well, we didn't win every battle, but we won most. And you just have to bring common sense back to that. I always use it. We had a situation where some of the trade folks had very restrictive regulations on licensure. For example, in our apprenticeship rules, Montana required 2 journeymen for every apprentice, which means if you're Joe the electrician with a van and you want to grow your business, you can't hire an apprentice.
Right. Yep.
So we changed that ratio, and we got some flack, but in the end, everybody realized we went to a reasonable compromise. We now allow 1 journeyman to supervise 2 apprentices, whereas before it was 2 journeymen for every apprentice. That single change quadrupled the number of apprenticeship slots in the state. And the fact is, we don't have enough housing. People have discovered Montana. They're moving here. We have a supply side problem on housing. And if you want more houses, you need more carpenters and plumbers and electricians. That single apprenticeship ratio was necessary to kind of open it up and let more people get into the trades. And oh, by the way, those are good paying jobs. If you started as an electrical apprentice in Montana, you start at $20 to $25 an hour while you're going to school. 4 years later, when you get your journeyman certificate, you start at $80,000 a year wiring buildings. That's a good job, and that makes the American dream a little more attainable for that individual.
For sure, yeah. And you kind of anticipated my next question. And I've been out there a couple of times in the last year and a half. In my first trip back in 22, I was talking to some folks, and I was surprised to hear what housing cost out there. And you think Montana and wide open spaces, and you'd think things are fairly affordable. But like you say, people have discovered it, and there are people streaming in. You've been one of the fastest growing states. You've focused specifically on housing, and you've talked about the trades end of it, but what else have you done to attack that housing crisis that I think everyone's feeling?
Let me just say, there are many communities in Montana where housing is still very affordable. We have some hot spots, and I blame the show Yellowstone mostly.
Right.
It was 30 years ago, it was a river runs through it. Now it's the show Yellowstone. People have discovered Montana. It was exacerbated by the pandemic because people realized they didn't have to go to the office all the time. So the smartest people moved to the most beautiful places. And in many cases, that was Montana. So we recognize that this affordability of housing was probably the number one issue facing working families in Montana. We want teachers, police officers, nurses to be able to live in the communities where they work. And that was getting out of reach. As we analyzed it, I pulled a task force together. It was bipartisan. It had public sector individuals, county commissioners, mayors, people from the building industry, nonprofits like Habitat for Humanity. And I tasked them in August of 2022 to cast a wide net and give me some good ideas on what we should do. They delivered in October and then in December, just a few months later, and we ran the table during the last legislative session. And here's what we did. I mentioned apprenticeships. We also added our M-Tech scholarship, which will pay any employer in the state 50% of the tuition to send one of their employees to trade school. Again, you need more carpenters and plumbers. We also learned that 40% of the cost of a new home is government regulations. I was on a project in Missoula, just because they had a 7th-month delay in permits, the cost of their project went up $700,000. So we changed a bunch of the zoning rules that impede permit issuance. For example, we also, we added master planning. So now communities can adopt a master growth plan, go through all the public hearings, but once it's adopted, if a builder walks in and asks for a permit and it matches the growth plan, there's no public hearings, they just issue the permit.
Yeah.
We got rid of exclusionary zoning. So now anywhere you can put a single family home in Montana, you can build a duplex. We also authorized auxiliary dwelling units, which allows anybody in the state in a single family home district to add an apartment over the garage or a basement apartment or to put a tiny home in the backyard. That allows people on fixed income to have a little more income, and it provides starter homes for our teachers, police officers, and nurses. The last thing I'll mention that we did, we took about $106 million of our surplus and put it into a low interest revolving loan fund specifically to help municipalities pay for water and sewer on new subdivisions, provided these new subdivisions have at least 10 units per acre. I mean, we have plenty of ranchettes. What we need is workforce housing. Right. And there were really no infrastructure funds available. They were all designed for urban renewal. We needed to add something for growth, which is what we did. And I'll just mention, in concluding on this point, Jim, we're seeing results. In Missoula, which was one of these hot spots, a year ago, the vacancy rate on apartments was just over 1%, which is way too low. You're not going to find a place. Right. Because of our supply side work, using free market principles, Just last month, it was announced that the vacancy rate on apartment rentals is now over 6%. That's a change in 1 year.
Wow.
And average rents in both Missoula and Bozeman, through some anecdotal feedback we've gotten, average rents have dropped about 20% in the last year. So the changes we've made are having an impact.
So it's really interesting to me. I'm a small government guy myself, and you hit on how these things become a virtuous circle, right? You make these changes in one place and they become positives in another. And I just saw the headline today. I've seen it several times in the last few weeks about how the Republican Party, and I'm a Republican myself, has lost its way on small government and free market. So how do we get that message out to the people who are supposed to be pushing this stuff, that, you know, we've been kind of going the wrong direction here, and here's an example of how it works.
Yeah, and I believe, I mean, I was really encouraged by the speech at the World Economic Forum by the president of Argentina. Very
Wonderful.
powerful defense of free market.
Right.
You don't have to go very far. Wayne Grudem and Barry Asmus's book, The Poverty of Nations, is another more articulate form of that. This free market system is the only system in the history of the world that's lifted people out of poverty, created prosperity, and created brighter futures. And we just have to get back to that. I had a person recently say to me, well, we need to add some new taxes because it's not fair. These people don't have enough. These people have too much. And I just said, quite frankly, there's never been an instance in the history of the country where we've taxed our way to prosperity.
That's right.
What we need to do is free up the entrepreneurial spirits, remove the unnecessary regulations, and let small business people thrive. I just did a talk last week at a Chamber of Commerce dinner, and they said, what's your best advice for businesses? And I was pretty frank. I said, the last place you should be looking for advice is from the government. Our job is to get out of the way.
Well, you are a businessman originally, though, right?
Well, I've been in their shoes, so
For sure. Excellent. And thank you for not just talking the talk, but showing people that this stuff really does work.
Yeah. We just to put a point on it.
Yeah.
Before I came into office, our unemployment in Montana in the prior 50 years, 50, had only been below 3% 3 times in 50 years. Since I've been in office, just 3 years, we've had 25 consecutive months of unemployment at or below 3%.
Yeah.
We have more people working than ever before. And this started with our action right during the pandemic. We were the first state in the country to end supplemental unemployment benefits because we needed to get people back to work, and it worked.
Yeah, for sure. And you've mentioned people a couple of times. When I was talking to Jens Bergner, the CEO at Valcom, about them moving to Lewistown, the main thing he talked about was the people. And I asked him why Montana. He said the people. So, what is it that other manufacturers out there looking for a place to go to for a new plant or for establishing themselves should know about the people of Montana that makes such a difference?
Yeah, well, it's our rural lifestyle. It's the independent nature that's not too far descended from the pioneer days. And here's why it makes a difference. We found this in our software business. Manufacturers see it. Many Montanans have grown up on a farm or a ranch that's a long way from town. And when it's harvest time and the tractor's broke, you don't form a committee. You don't call a consultant. Right. You just fix the tractor. We call that, in Montana parlance, that's a get her done attitude. And if you want workers that are just going to get it done and be loyal to your business and ride for the brand, which is part of the cowboy ethic, come to Montana. We have a place for you.
I found it really interesting talking to Jens that he made a specific mention that they're a Mittelstand in Germany, one of the companies that works actively with their employees, not as employer and employee, but as partners. And what you just said, just strikes me as that is the way you're going to have your employees in Montana if you locate out there.
That's right.
So then let me twist it around and throw you the loaded question to wrap up here, Governor. We've seen it again and again, people doing good things in a certain part of the country, people who are in another part of the country that's not doing so well move there, and then they vote the same way they did in the place that wasn't doing so well, and things go south. How do you insulate Montana from that kind of dynamic?
Well, my core, the reason I ran was twofold. I mentioned this earlier. More good jobs so Montanans don't have to leave. And secondly, protect our way of life. That's individual freedoms. It's embracing our Second Amendment. And I'm very clear whenever I'm on national media, I talk about Montana as a sanctuary for freedom and the free market. And what we're finding is our initial efforts are targeted primarily on getting Montanans to move back home. They were raised here. That makes our community stronger. It puts families back together. And we're finding that people moving here embrace those core values as well. And we can't control who comes in, but the people coming here want the quality of life, and they bring with them the values that match Montana values.
Wonderful stuff. I will tell you that I got a connection on LinkedIn 2 days ago, a young man who then sent me an instant message and said, yeah, I understand you've been touting Montana and I'm looking to get back there. I went to Montana State and then moved out and I want to go back to Montana. So I'm out here being an ambassador for you, Governor.
Yeah, that's great. And we did the same thing in our business. We mailed the alumni list from Montana State University every 6 months with a postcard that said, come home to Montana.
Wonderful. Excellent. Is there anything else people ought to know about what's going on in Montana before we wrap up?
I would just say one program we've instituted here at the Department of Commerce, we call it the Red Carpet Program. If there's a business owner out there that's just sick and tired of the regulations they have in their state, they want a place where people come to work, ready to work, and they want the advantage that Montana offers in terms of work ethic and lifestyle, reach out to our office. We'll talk with you about what your criteria are. We'll build a 2-day agenda around your requirements, and literally we'll roll out the red carpet to let you consider whether you want to invest here in Montana.
All right. So takeaways from my friends in manufacturing are don't go to Montana looking for a handout. Go to Montana for a great place to do business.
That's right.
Perfect. Governor, it's been an honor, sir.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you. Keep up the good work out there. And of course, thanks to all of you in the audience. I hope you took away very important messages here because I think they're critical for our country. And yeah, if you want to learn how to do it right, go see the folks in Montana. Thanks.
Thanks for tuning in to Manufacturing Talks with Jim Benoski. Watch for new episodes dropping every Tuesday. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe.